Hello, everyone, and welcome back to OneSoccer. I'm your host for today, Josh Deming. I'm joined by my colleague, Alex Gangue-Ruzic, and our special guest, Ben Steiner. Ben, how are you doing today?
I'm doing quite well and excited to be here. So certainly excited to be on this video.
Yeah, today we are going to talk CPL rivalries. It's rivalry week here in the Canadian Premier League. A few matches we'll touch on, but we're first going to take a little trip down memory road and kind of take a look at what creates these rivalries, because rivalries are some of the best part about football. They go back centuries. They take a lot of time to build. And in a new league, we want to take a look at what has created some of the rivalries that are existing right now, what could potentially create some new ones. So Alex, let's just throw it over to you. What to you makes a rivalry so special? And let's, I guess, start off with the OG rivalry in the Canadian Premier League, Forge and York.
Yeah, I think naturally there's derbies, right? What's a derby? It's a match between two teams, usually in the same city. Of course, you look across the world, there's a history of, being multiple soccer teams in the same city. London is a great example. You can go even, Buenos Aires, and just the dozens of teams there are there. So proximity will always create a good rivalry. It helps a lot for fans. I mean, it's a little easier to do a 10, 50, 100 kilometer trip than it is 1,000, 2,000 kilometer trips like we unfortunately have in the CPL with the grandeur of this country. So Forge and York is a great example of that. Just 90 kilometers separate them. So that's about, an hour drive on a good day, a couple hours transit if you use that method. And that's the big part of it, because I think at the end of the day, derbies and rivalries come down to fans. It comes down to just that civic pride of, you don't want to, you want to win territorial rights. You don't want to lose to your neighbors, right? Why? Because you're going to hear about it. If you lose to some team that's 1,000 kilometers away, like, oh, whatever, we're not going to hear about it. Maybe you'll see it on social media a bit. But when you lose to your neighbors, they're going to be loud. They're going to plaster that up everywhere. They're like, we own this city. This is our area. This is our region. And it hurts if you're a team like, you lose in your own backyard and you have 100, 200 away fans dancing and cheering long after the final whistle. And I think Forge and York is a great example of that. Obviously, the first ever CPL game was able to pack it up, because at that time, they did that, pack the stadium, get everyone in, 14,000 plus people, I think it was that day. It was a great game. Forge and York, it was a lot of support for both teams. And since then it's built, right? I think of some of these games where York has gone in and won in Forge, and then they had 100 fans there backing them, and that helped it grow. And then on the flip side, Forge going into York and, bringing all their fans and winning. I think those are the best way to create derbies. And I think it's natural that why you look across the world, wherever you look, there, all these sorts of big derbies, they usually start in one city.
Yeah, and I think it's fair to say that rivalry got a little push because it was like you said, the very first match in Canadian Premier League history. They packed it, they were close. It was wonderful. But Ben, another rivalry that built over time, a very different way. It includes Forge, but it also includes Cavalry. Now, this rivalry, in my opinion, happened because these were two big dogs going head to head, toe to toe every single season. Forge usually at the end of the day got the better of them, but there were some incredible matches over these first few seasons of the Canadian Premier League, wasn't there?
Well, I mean, when you look back at Forge and Cavalry over that first season in particular, of course, like it was the split season. And so you had Forge that really dominated throughout, but Cavalry got off to a strong start right out of the gates. Tommy Wheeldon Jr. had his guys ready to go with the CPL, of course, with their roots from the foothills. And then you had the two sort of established clubs. You had Bobby and Sigma going to Forge, and Foothills and Tommy going to Cavalry. And they both just started quickly. And because they started quickly, because they didn't have that time to form, they were ready to go right from the start. And with that, they were immediately the two top dogs. Because when you look at a team like Pacific, it took a little while to get underway. Sure, they won that first game, a header by Henrik Starozic to win that first game at Starlight. And I guess you could call it a derby in a bit of a coastal clash between Pacific and Halifax. But even then, you've got, 4,000 kilometers splitting them. So it's not exactly a local derby. But when you look at Forge versus Cavalry, Forge, of course, dominated the league. Everybody wants to beat the team at the top. Doesn't matter who you are, you're going to be up for that game. You're up for a game against the champions, and more often than not, Forge are the champions in the CPL. And Cavalry, well, they've always, they've not achieved exactly what they want. They've not been able to get that title. They've come close. They came close in the final that first year, but they've not been able to get over that line. So they've definitely got a bit of a monkey on their back, a bit of a chip on their shoulder, and having Forge there adds a little bit of vigor to their season. And so that's how that derby established itself, I would say. but also because of the fans, because at the end of the day, the fans are what really power the derby. And I know that we're going to get into that as well. But when you look at the foot soldiers and you look at the Forge supporters as well, the Barton Street Battalion, they're two of the most diehard fans in the CPL, and going head to head definitely powers this derby.
Yeah, I'll touch on the Barton Street Battalions in a sec, but I do want to go back on that point that you said, because it's almost a mental thing now with when those two go head to head, because of the pain that Cavalry has had after having such a successful, multiple successful seasons, just to fall to the end. It makes it so much more special because you have one fan group who doesn't want to give up that power, give up that title, and you have another fan group who's just dying to taste that success. But I am going to touch over to the fans as well, because there are some new kids on the blocks. That's Athletico Ottawa, and they have some passionate fans. And I have talked with the Barton Street Battalion, hopefully for a future video, but I was told that the heated rivalry that is brewing between Ottawa and Forge is solely because of the fan base and the way that they clashed. We saw it last year in the final. If you went on Twitter and you looked at the fan base, they were going toe to toe. They were talking the big talk. And at the end of the day, despite, the successful season Ottawa had and the final being in Ottawa, it was Forge with the last laugh, and it just rubbed the Ottawa fans the wrong way, and they're desperate for revenge. How beautiful was that rivalry to see it brew before your very eyes, Alex?
Yeah, I think that was a very fun one, just because, it feels a little more organic, right? In the sense that, those are often the best derbies, and that's the one it's interesting to see grow. I think, of course, proximity can create natural rivalries. I mean, we can talk about one of those that could be trending that way, of course, very early days. But the nice thing about Ottawa is that they've just come in and look, their first few years, they weren't very good. And as a result, they were just kind of there. It was Ottawa, this new team, with the Madrid backing that was kind of there, but, not reaching its full potential. Then last year, all of a sudden, they got to that full potential. They went to Forge, won in Forge. They got points off Forge. Like, okay, who is this team that's coming in, bringing these away fans, kind of going about it in this very outgoing, loud, brash way? Like, if you're Forge, especially a team that hates losing, like, you're going to see that. Like, who are these guys? Let's go humble them. And, the fact that they were able to get that last laugh in the final in Ottawa, you had so many Forge fans. I think it must have been 200 or 300 Forge fans in the corner lifting the trophies. That's something where, I think the nice thing is about some of these derbies, moments like that, it's going to stick. Because now on Ottawa's side, you're looking like that was, not disrespectful. That's the wrong way, but it was kind of, if you're Ottawa, you're going to view it as disrespectful. Like, they came into our turf, they won the trophy. There's proximity, right? Obviously, if Hamilton and Ottawa aren't close, it is still a 5-6 hour drive. But hey, for derbies, fans will do that in a heartbeat. And I think, again, this shows how important fans are to all this. I think it's something, if fans are disinterested in the derby, it can kind of lose its meaning. Because look, if you look at it, when I was doing my research, the original CPL derby actually isn't York and Forge. It's Edmonton and Cavalry, because, Edmonton had its roots back in the, USL and, et cetera days, and Cavalry obviously with Foothill. So there's kind of that natural, contempt already there. But the problem was, they came in the league, Cavalry never lost a derby game. And like, at a certain point, if you're Edmonton, if you've never won, like you never won a game, never less anything, right? Like, it's something where you kind of lose a bit of that contempt. If you're the fans, like, okay, this doesn't mean anything. If you're Calgary, you're just laughing, like, we beat Edmonton all the time. So it does help to have that bit of fan hatred, that fan, just energy, especially when it's close and competitive like Forge and Ottawa was last year.
And these types of rivalries are so important for a young growing league. It brings in interest, especially, when come playoff time. And I think we saw it a little bit, and it shows that there is history already brewing 5 years into this league, because I remember early on when Athletico Ottawa looked like they were going to have a very successful season and they were doing so well, they were coming at the Forge fans. They were poking fun. They said, "Look at us! Like, we're winning this." Like, there was the we're so big trending on, or we're a massive club that was trending. And Forge fans are like, "Hey, man, we've been here for years, showing this success. You can't just come in here and think that you're going to take it at the end." So it was a very humbling moment for those Athletico fans. But I love the passion. That's what I would want to do if I was an Ottawa fan. I would be thrilled with the season that they had, and I'd want to get it over the line. They weren't able to. They'll have to regroup and come back. But Ben, let's switch our gears now a little bit to I guess the newest kids on the block. Now, sorry, Athletico Ottawa, you've been here for a few years, but it's Vancouver FC. It's Pacific. They're playing in Vancouver this weekend. Tell me a little bit of why this rivalry is special, and maybe touch on some of the players, because some of the West Coast players, it's not uncommon for them to maybe jump from like they jumped from the Whitecaps to Pacific, and now some Pacific players going over to Vancouver. So players playing on both sides of like a derby or a classic match or something, Classico, whatever it may be, can create a little bit of tension, I think.
Well, I think when you look at the Vancouver FC versus Pacific FC derby, whatever name organically grows from that or is eventually marketed from that as well. But when you look at that derby, it's almost personal, and that's what the Vancouver FC social admin put out the other day, is this derby, because BC Soccer is so intertwined with all the clubs, there's flavor from every club on Vancouver FC's roster. They've kind of pulled from everywhere. They've pulled from local leagues. They've pulled from local men's leagues with Nima. They've pulled from Pacific FC with Callum Irving. They pulled from the Whitecaps with their equipment manager as well. So they have a bit of everything on that roster. And I think there's a certain revenge aspect whenever you face your old club or a club that maybe did you wrong in some way, didn't give you enough playing time. So I think there's that aspect that is certainly going to be there for both teams, but more so for Vancouver FC. And there's also that pride. I think Vancouver FC has done a fantastic job to establish sort of a civic pride within their players, and head coach Afshin Gotbi has seemingly just settled into the community really well and has a pride for Langley, a pride for Vancouver, and really supporting that club as well as coaching it. And so I think when you go into that rivalry, you have the organicness, for lack of a better word, of just having that pride of your area. And I think a lot of those players have that. You look at Josh Hurd and some of the local players on that Pacific FC side as well. So you've got two teams that are going to be playing for their areas, playing for their fan base. You have a Vancouver FC fan base that has turned up in good numbers for the most part. The 5-0 loss to Athletico Ottawa didn't do them many favors, but getting a derby and putting on a good show, maybe scoring some home goals against a rival, is certainly going to be a big deal for Vancouver FC, and Pacific FC won't want to let BC turn black in the CPL.
I was going to say, BC is a booming soccer market. I mean, we saw it when the Whitecaps and Pacific played in the Canadian Championship. Alex and I just did a video on this and how BC was purple for a while. I mean, the Rovers story was incredible, but Whitecaps got their revenge and they were poking fun back. You know, it's great to see these little rivalries happen. But Alex, again, switching, because we've looked at proximity, we've looked at derbies, I mean, the same thing, but, a little closer. We've looked at, competitiveness. But now let's take a look at some moments, because some rivalries that you and I talked about before we started recording here happen through pure moments. So is there a moment that you can think back to that really spiced a rivalry, despite maybe there not being one there beforehand?
Yeah, I think, some of these, the great thing is about some of these derbies, and they can brew off just one flash, right? Fans especially, they have long memories. You remember some, one flash here, one red card in a game, one dumb tackle, one fan agitating, and and it can build from there. And I think there's some great examples of that. I think Pacific Cavalry, for example, they've played each other in the Canadian Championship. I think it's like 3 out of the 5 years, if possible. Like, there's only 1 year where they haven't faced each other. Like, that's annoying, right? That's annoying if you're both of those teams, because those are high stake games where it's literally one team goes home and one team stays alive. Like, you are going to be fighting for the death. Then I think of the 2021 playoffs, which Pacific goes on to win. Remember the Kunle Dadaluke controversy where was the ball in, was the ball out? They scored that goal. That kind of almost gave Cavalry a bit of a shoulder when they faced Pacific in 2022. I don't know if you remember, they had some great meetings in 2022. Like, there's that game where it was the double red cards between David Norman Jr. and Manny Aparicio. There was that 3-3 game where it was just absolute bonkers. And I think it's something where, because of all of those moments, you're kind of, when Pacific Cavalry play each other, you're like, okay, there's a bit of something here. There's a bit of feistiness. We saw it in 2023. And there's other examples too. I think another great one is something you might not think of, but I always look forward to these Valor versus Halifax Wanderers games. It's games that are always close. I think they have 2 of the closest records of 2 teams in the CPL. And for that, you think of moments when Jordan Morel got that red card in 2019 and kicked the table in Halifax. It kind of added a bit of spice, a bit of fire to that derby. And you look now, like last year, I remember when they played each other, Nessie Mekidesh got a very hard red card away last year, and that kind of fired up Halifax. And Halifax ended up picking a huge 1-0 win that ended up derailing Valor's late playoff push. They only missed by a few points. What a win there would have done for them. And I think little games like that, they add up. And now all of a sudden you're like, yeah, Halifax Valor was very feisty this year. And now I think every time they play each other, they're going to remember moments like that. And that's sometimes how you build these rivalries you don't really expect. But okay, maybe there's a bit something there.
And Ben, the last type of rivalry we're going to look at, it's a very unique one. There's the Cascadia Cup, which is an example of one, but it's a three-way kind of rivalry. And there is one that's somewhat brewing between Athletico Ottawa, Forge, and of course, York. And the last one I didn't touch on was York versus Ottawa. So I was talking to some York fans, I was talking to some Forge fans, and both of them, and I don't know if it's just maybe because the Athletico Ottawa fans are aggressive. I don't know exactly what is the tension between, but York really likes playing Ottawa. They like that type of rivalry as well, as does Forge. So Ben, what do you think goes into, I mean, a three-way type of rivalry like that? I know that they're close. I mean, like the Cascadia Cup, like I said, is a great example of that. But is it simply just comes down to they're close to one another and they want to get the better of the fan groups, I guess?
I think there's a lot of factors when you look at sort of the three-way rivalry that you have there, because all teams in Ontario, there's Ontario pride. You want to be the king of the province in the CPL. And then York has never really reached the heights of either team, with Athletico Ottawa making the final last year. So York has that chip on their shoulder. They want to get one over their provincial rivals, but also Athletico Ottawa travels really well. And I think that's an underrated part of it, is the fan support at the away stadium, when you're actually getting in the faces of those home fans, can really impact what a derby comes to be. Because Athletico Ottawa comes in, they're brash, they're loud, they're fun, and they're annoying to home fans. And I think that can be overlooked because they can drown out the home fans at several stadiums. They can almost do it at Forge. They can sometimes do it at York Lions Stadium as well. So they have a lot of just charisma to them. And I think that's probably why a lot of the York and Forge fans dislike Athletico Ottawa. It's not necessarily the team or what's happening on the field all the time, but definitely the fans in the stands. That's not to say that what's on the field is meaningless either, because you have Mo Babouli, who is always energized against both those teams, especially his former team in Forge. And then you have a guy like Ollie Bassett who comes in and he completely balls out against either team. So yeah, you have exciting players on all three teams, and you have Ottawa's fans that come in and just create an astounding atmosphere at away stadiums. And I think that can really power a bit of a three-way derby.
No, I agree. And from what I've talked to from the fan groups, and again, this is the perspective from the fan groups, because that's who I was talking to, it's just basically that. It's like, they're annoying. We don't like when they come into our house and get a result. And it's just a reason we like playing Ottawa, which I think is great for this league. But Alex, like we said, it is rivalry week here in the Canadian Premier League. We have 3 matches coming up. We'll start, because Ben gave me the little leeway into it, with Bobuli. So let's take a look at Forge and York. What are you expecting between those two this Wednesday night?
Yeah, I think it should be a good game. All of a sudden, it's first versus third, obviously, with Forge leading the table and York climbing up with a couple wins. Their first game was very competitive. I mean, Forge went into to York Lions Stadium 1-0, but it was a very even game. It was one where York had a lot of great chances after Forge went up. They just couldn't put any away. Tristan Henry made some huge saves. So I'd expect a pretty competitive game. Obviously, Forge at home is a different beast, but hopefully York can bring a good traveling support. They have won some big games in the past year against Forge when you least expect them to. And I think in a game like this where they're in good form, I think they could give a good battle and maybe get a potential point off Forge, though. Although Forge are the favorites, as they are against pretty much almost everyone in this league right now, given their play, it should still be a good game.
Heading to the West Coast, we have, like I mentioned, Vancouver hosting Pacific. Ben, what are you looking forward to most about this match?
I'm looking forward to just the very first match of whatever you want to call this derby. Ferry side already taken for Pacific and Whitecaps. But I think it just adds a new flavor to the CPL, another sort of local derby in a sense. Not exactly local, of course, you do have to take a ferry between the two. But you have all those players who have switched sides, whether from Pacific to Vancouver FC or from the Whitecaps to Vancouver FC. And it just adds that freshness. I think something new is always exciting. And having it in Langley as well will surely bring some fans in too, from both sides. So I think that the fan energy and just having something new in the CPL is always exciting for a growing league.
And Alex, finally, I mean, we've mentioned Forge once, so might as well mention them again. They are going to Cavalry. I know that this is, I mean, Calgary's not in the greatest form right now, so I am intrigued to see the way that this one goes, considering that this is Forge's best ever start to a season. But what are you expecting when these two juggernauts go head to head?
Well, the great thing about classics when teams meet, first of all, they can change seasons. Like if Cavalry wins over Forge, I could genuinely see them going on a 3, 4, 5 game run, just because it's one of those where, you see that all the time, right? Like how many times has a Real Madrid gone to Barcelona in terrible form and won, and all of a sudden you resurrect your season and vice versa. That's the great thing about classics. When it's the two big dogs heading up against each other, you almost put everything into a game, and the winner takes all the energy out of it and feels it, and the team that loses can almost get some of that energy sapped out. And the great thing, first of all, about these two teams is the level of play whenever they go up against each other is just astounding. It's pace, it's hard tackles, it's quick passes. We saw that earlier this year with the 2-2 draw. How many 2-2 draws have we seen in their history? Plus, there's just you think of all the past red cards, past just intense matches. It's going to be a high level contest, especially in Calgary. It feels like on Cavalry, it's almost personal. Like they welcome Forge. They do not roll out the red carpet. Let's just say that. So I'm expecting an intense and competitive game, and I think that one should be close. And I'm curious to see, if it feels like it's kind of back and forth, and Cavalry kind of got the edge in the first game, considering they went into Forge and got the point. So can Forge return the favor? That's probably what I'd edge for. But also, given that Cavalry has the rest, I'd say keep an eye on Cavalry in this game.
Yeah, it's going to be exciting. 3 fantastic matches. That is our episode today on different rivalries throughout the Canadian Premier League and during Rivalry Week. So, Ben, I appreciate you coming on. It's a pleasure having you, Alex, as always. And if you guys did enjoy this video, be sure to drop a like, drop a sub, and we'll see you guys soon. Cheers, friends.